Hey there, Mr. Reddit here. Welcome back to another episode of r/Entitled Parent Stories. Our first story we'll be reading today. My mom forced me to let her into my psychiatrist appointment because she was worried what I'd say about her. After that, roommate blackmailed us and almost lost us our apartment, so we played dirty. And after that, entitled mom stops an ambulance from getting to a heart attack patient. Now for every thumbs up this video gets, one Karen breaks a nail. How dare you! So please smash that like button. And if you're new, subscribe and turn on notifications for news stories from Reddit every single day. My mom forced me to let her into my psychiatrist appointment because she was worried what I'd say about her. Background: I'm a 21-year-old on a high amount of meds for epilepsy, and I dropped out of college to deal with my medical issues since I used to have a seizure once a week. I'm currently going to a community college to transfer to a better university in a different major, so I will graduate 2 years later than all my classmates. So I was talking to my psychiatrist on video chat since I couldn't go to the hospital. Since this is a first appointment, he is asking some basic questions like, do you hear voices, or have you had thoughts of self-harm type things? I answer honestly. I mention my mother and family issues, like how my mother and father have been fighting since I was born, and blame me for their deteriorating relationship. Me. Oh, and my mom tends to insult me a lot, calling me a failure and names because I'm going to a community college right now. I also have anger issues, and after she screams and calls me swear words and phrases over 40 times in a minute, I counted, I wasn't lying, for more than a minute while I helped her for 2 hours, then slapped me twice hard for stepping on something. I forgot what. So enraged, I pinched her forehead, tried to lightly slap her cheek, and stormed off. Me, panicking. Wait, please don't tell the police or anyone what I've done. Psychiatrist. It seems like we need to talk again. Don't worry though, we want to help you. We won't tell anyone what you or your mother have done. I mentioned it to my mom, one thing over a 2-hour session, and it was a huge mistake. Mom. How could you tell them something like that, you narcissist? What's wrong with you? Me. But I sent you what I said exactly. You're a liar. Nothing you say is true. You're the last person I would trust. Me. Mom, I'm sorry, but I don't lie. I tell what I did and what you did no matter what. And they said, Mom. Don't you dare call me Mom, you dumb idiot. You're lucky to be living with me at 22. I'm 21. All your classmates and friends are graduating 2 years before you. Me. I'm sorry. I won't mention you again. Mom rants and raves. You never stop talking or starting arguments. You could have got me arrested. Well, I'll get you arrested, you jerk. Now make sure I'm in your next appointment, or I won't let you see your psychiatrist. Me. But, Mom, shut up and only talk to them about your anger issues, you useless jerk failure. God, how can you still be talking about your family at 22? Me. I mean, it's not like Your brother is 30 and doesn't complain or argue with me. Me. Silent, even though I know that's not true. If my mom insults him when he visits, he will leave the house and go to his apartment immediately. Then, depending on how she acted, come back later. Also, my mom is comparing me to my brother, who is 9 years older with no medical issues, but he lived at home until he was 26 and got his first CS job. Mom insults me for another hour, then is quiet. Edit. My mom and I get along so well for like 2 days, and for 3 days there's nothing really. But 2 days later, it's like this. Second edit. Thank you for the advice and kindness, everyone. But most of all, I never realized how supportive and caring an online community could be until this post. I really appreciate it. Edit for clarification. Next year, I'm transferring to an out-of-state university, so she won't have to contact me unless she wants to, which will probably be rarely. But yeah, as long as I deal with her a little longer, next year I'll transfer out of state for the rest of my undergrad. My heart really goes out to OP. Most of us can't really imagine what it would feel like to have parents treat you like this. But unfortunately, it happens all the time. I'm glad that they have their psychiatrist to talk to about it though. Sometimes having someone to talk to about things you're going through makes all the difference. Entitled mom stops an ambulance from getting to a heart attack patient. This happened at the end of last summer, and I wasn't within earshot for most of it, so I can't give great detail as to what exactly was said, but I'll try my best. Background. I work at a summer day camp, and everyone is like a family there. I went to the camp myself from age 6 to 15 before working there. The staff usually are rehired when possible, especially directors, so returning campers see the same faces every year, so some of the younger staff have known the veteran staff for almost our entire lives. That's why it is very common for the camp counselors to have been campers once themselves, like me. This is important to remember, as those involved in this story include both 2 veteran staff and multiple former campers, now counselors, including me. Okay, now to the story. It's the very last day of camp for the summer. All of the campers have said their goodbyes and have left on their respective buses. The only people left are the staff and the kids who are in the aftercare program for kids whose parents either work late or they need to be picked up from camp directly. There's almost no parking, not even enough for staff, so they bus the kids in every day. The staff wrap up their last staff meeting for the season, and we all make our way to the front of camp. One of the counselors, who was I think 2 years older than me, Carter, ran up ahead because the lunch lady, Chris, was about to leave and wanted to say goodbye. As we were rounding the corner, we hear Carter call out for Chris, and she is laying on the ground. Everyone is ushered into the bus that was going to take us to where the staff parking was, while one of the directors calls the ambulance. Carter is in tears. He was especially close to Chris, not to mention this is the second veteran staff member to be hospitalized that summer. He tells us that he had just said goodbye and turned to walk away when he glanced back. She was on the ground and not responding. Chris was a bit of a bigger woman, so everyone was worried about if the CPR would be successful, since the only people there were very small build. Thankfully, another vet staff arrived and he was able to take over CPR, which we later discovered if it wasn't for him, she would have died. So the ambulance is on the way, but the problem was that the road the camp is on is a major road in our city, and it was right during afternoon traffic rush. Not to mention, the street was having construction done, which turned it into a 2-lane street. Then a small car pulls up, and it's a mom looking to pick up her kid. One of the staff is quick to tell her to pull off to the side. The driveway is very narrow and can barely fit one bus at a time. She is understanding and gets out of the way. She even gets out and tries to talk to the staff who are waiting on the bus. I believe she even tried calming some of us down. One of the directors drove a golf cart to go get her kid, so she waited there with us. Enter entitled parent. I'm not 100% sure if she was a Karen or just someone who was a bit dense, but she still nearly caused a woman to lose her life. This big black SUV pulls up, and already she sees that something is off. Being the intelligent person she is, she stops her vehicle in the middle of the driveway and asks what's going on. Again, she is being directed to park off to the side, but she doesn't want to move. The lady just sits there and tells a staff worker that she is there to pick up her kid. Note, Chris collapsed right in front of the entrance to camp, so this woman had a front row view of people performing CPR on her. She doesn't have your typical Karen voice, but still, she isn't moving and keeps asking what was going on. It had been a few minutes now, and you could faintly hear sirens in the distance. The ambulance was near, and this woman was still blocking the only way into the camp. At this point, I storm out of the bus and run over to her. By this time, Carter has noticed the SUV and has made his way from staying next to Chris to getting up in this woman's face and just goes to town on her. I can't remember what he says, and it didn't help that he was screaming through his tears, but the lady eventually got the hint and went off to the side. I was ushered back into the bus, this time Carter following behind me. Once we are inside, he just breaks down. I'm still in shock when I hear something from next to the bus. Remember that other mother from before? Well, now Karen was drilling her about what was happening. The first mother, not knowing fully, tried to calmly explain the situation as best as she could. Then the Karen turns to the bus full of crying 20-year-olds. She is right outside my window, but as I am a lower rank, she addresses one of the other staff. I am here to pick up my son. I'm sorry, miss, but we're kind of dealing with something. If you could wait. Why am I parked over here? This isn't the pickup. Why won't you let me go pick up my son? Note, Chris had collapsed in the road that runs through camp. There was no way to get any vehicle other than a golf cart into the main camp because they were trying to save a woman's life. The director of the camp comes over and explains this to her, but Karen isn't having it. I want my son. He is scared. Let me go get my son. Ma'am, we can send for your son, but are you sure you want him to be here to see this? By now, the ambulance has arrived. They actually got into camp easily considering the construction. We are ever grateful, as it turns out they arrived just in time. I don't care. I want my son now. A few minutes later, a golf cart pulls up with both moms' kids in it. The first mom ushers her kid into the car and gives him something to keep him entertained as to hopefully distract him from what is happening. Then the Karen gets in her car and tells her kid to do the same. Karen starts her car and tries to leave. By now, there are 3 police, a fire truck, and an ambulance in single file along the driveway. There is no way Karen is getting out. I see Karen sigh and gets out of her car. She goes back to the director and tells him that she needs to leave. He looks at her, looks at the driveway, clearly not knowing how to respond. He tells her that they can't just move the ambulance and other first responders' vehicles just so she can leave. She huffs and crosses her arms. Their exchange continues for another few minutes until a police officer has to come over and tell the woman to get in her car and stay there. She had been trying to follow the director as he tried to leave the conversation as to give a statement as to what had happened. The mom reluctantly went into her car and spent the next 10 minutes getting death glares from a bus full of at least 50-something upset staff. Have any of you ever been to some sort of a camp? And if so, did you like it? Please let me know. I'm not in the military. Shove off. This was years ago. My husband was in the Army on his second enlistment, 5 or 6 years total at this point. He had already been through a couple deployments by this point. We were at a new base overseas, and I had gotten a job at the after-school care facility on post. Well, his unit was getting ready to deploy for 6 months, so they were in the thick of all that. The chaplain was having a pre-deployment meeting for all the spouses to talk about the changes to expect while our spouses are deployed, from practical issues to emotional stuff to disruptions in routine. Bear in mind, this was back when if you were really lucky, you maybe got a 10-minute call from your spouse once a month, maybe an email as well. Letters were still more common than anything. Now, both my husband and I are pretty easygoing, and we had both been through a couple deployments, so I already knew the drill, what to expect, how to manage, etc. So I decided not to bother with the meeting. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a fantastic resource for spouses, and they would do a post-deployment one as well to help everyone transition back to normal life with their spouses, but I didn't feel the need to attend. A couple days later, my husband shows up at my workplace and tells me he's been ordered by his lieutenant to bring me to the spouse meeting. This was a second lieutenant who was fresh out of OCS, was not prior enlisted, and my husband had socks older than this guy's term of military service. For those who don't know, a second lieutenant is the lowest ranked officer. They're the noobs, and it's very common for them to think they know it all and act accordingly. This guy was one of those. I was highly peeved, but not for one moment did I blame my husband. I could tell he was annoyed as well, and I knew that since it was a direct order that he had to obey it. I thought for a minute and asked him to hang on a minute so I could talk to my boss. Now, school was set to let out soon, and they needed me there because of adult/kid ratio requirements. But I explained the situation to my boss and told her I'd be back as soon as possible. She understood the situation and said she'd fill in for me until I could get back. She was cool that way, and everyone on base, if they weren't military, was the spouse of one due to being on an overseas base, so they all knew and understood when stuff like this came up. Very rarely you'd get the random GS employee civilian on post, but yeah, that was highly unusual. So I left with my husband, but instead of going to the chaplain's meeting, I told him to take me to his building where the second lieutenant was. He knew what I was up to and happily complied. Arrived at the lieutenant's office, knocked and went in while my husband stood in the hall. Asked him why he had ordered my husband to fetch me from my job that I was needed at. He rather pompously mansplained to me that this was a required function and that I needed to attend. Oh, I let him have it. I didn't raise my voice much, but I informed him in no uncertain terms that he had no authority whatsoever to order me to do anything. I was not in the military, not subject to his whims, and while he may be able to order my husband to come get me, he could not order me to go to this meeting. He tried interjecting at this point to say that I needed to go so that I would learn stuff about how to handle my husband being on a deployment. At this point, I nearly blew my top. I've spent more time with my husband being in the field and on deployments than you've spent in the military. My husband does not own me, he cannot force me to do anything, and neither can you. I will not be attending this meeting, and you will not force my husband to take me there. I'm going back to my job, and if I hear that you tried to make his life miserable because of it, so help me, I will go up your chain of command and make sure you regret it." Now, the building was not full, but it wasn't quite empty either. Oh, and the higher-ups were in their offices pretty close by. They were also super cool cats. My husband might have been enlisted, but they respected the work he did, and he respected them. And this lieutenant had been getting on their nerves as well. So yeah, they absolutely could hear what was going on, and I'm sure they enjoyed it. By the end of my tirade, the second lieutenant was nearly falling over himself to apologize. "Sorry, ma'am. I apologize, ma'am. It won't happen again, ma'am." He knew he was in the wrong, and by this point, he also knew I'd make a right royal stink if he tried to make me do anything or tried to punish my husband for my actions, or lack thereof. I left, and my husband took me back to my job, grinning like a fool. I was still pretty enraged at this point, but was cooling off pretty rapidly. For a few weeks afterward, I actually was concerned that there might be fallout from my husband because of what I did, but there wasn't. At least, not more than the usual BS he dealt with on a daily basis. It was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Like I said, I'm pretty laid back normally, but I will get steamed on other people's behalf. The problem is that I almost never have the opportunity or the right to get involved, and I recognize that sometimes doing so would definitely make bad worse. So having this opportunity was just golden. Sounds like she really taught that second lieutenant a lesson, eh, Karen?
That was okay. I would have spoken to his manager.
Karen won't move, so my electric wheelchair will move Karen. You know those inconsiderate people that congregate in a high-traffic area in a shop or a public area and are oblivious that they're in the way? And when a tap on the shoulder and "excuse me" goes unnoticed? This was one of those occasions. Only they didn't account for me and my power wheelchair. My electric wheelchair is very powerful. I can easily drag heavy objects across the floor. As long as it's not bolted to the floor, I can move it. This includes people. I'm not a violent or dangerous person, and I would never intentionally hurt someone with my chair. But that's not to say I'm afraid to show dominance or authority in certain situations if needed. This happened late last year. I had a few things to do downtown and a bit of shopping to get done. I went to my local grocery store, Woolies for my fellow yobos out there, to pick up the essentials. After I finished in the deli, I went in search of coffee and cat food, but as I rounded the corner, I saw about 6 people in a circle having a conversation and blocking the walkway. To their left was a wall, and to their right was a stocked shelf, and there was no way to go through them. Me. "Excuse me." Ignored. Me. Louder. "Excuse me." Ignored. I tapped one of them firmly on the shoulder and said, "Excuse me," again. Nothing. Instead of admitting defeat and going to the back of the store to get what I wanted, I'm stubborn. I wanted them to move so I could get past. I lightly tapped the back of the leg of one of them with the front of my power chair in hopes of getting their attention. Let's call her Karen. No luck there either. So I kept easing my chair slowly forward, making sure I wasn't running over her foot or hurting her in the process. I edged her forward a few inches before she finally noticed I was there. Karen.
OMG, what are you doing?
Me. Can I please get past?
What? Can't you see we're having a conversation? How dare you interrupt us? You're lucky I don't press charges for you running into me. Didn't your mom teach you better than that?
Me, slightly amused. My mom couldn't teach a fish to swim, but if she was here, she would have pushed you all out of her way already. I was being polite by asking you nicely to move, but clearly you're too wrapped up in your important conversation to acknowledge anyone else but yourselves. So I will ask you one last time. Will you please move aside so I can get past? By this point, their conversation stopped and they were all glaring at me like I was the rude one for wanting to get past them. Karen.
You should have waited for us to finish our conversation and not interrupted us. Kids these days.
I'm 29, so not a kid. But either way, respect is earned, not given. Me. You're in a public place and you're blocking this area for everyone. Please be more respectful and considerate to everyone else, and maybe have your important conversation somewhere else. Just a suggestion. There was enough of a gap for me to escape through, so I took it. I could hear Karen and her cronies muttering something insulting as I was leaving, but I didn't feel like hanging around to hear it. Karen clearly had a stick up her pipes and I didn't want to push it. Who knows what a wild Karen would do? Nothing else happened after that. I finished my shopping and went on my way. I know I didn't push my chair hard enough to hurt her, so please don't come at me about that. Karen was fine. Well, as fine as a Karen can get. The moral of the story: don't block a public space with your social gathering. Do it in an area that's big enough to do so. I'm sure you've seen people do this, and if you're one of them, shame on you.
I'll never understand why some people just love standing in your way. And I'll never understand why you expect us to move.
Facility closes at 8 sharp. I used to work at a drive-up storage facility. We had pretty cheap prices and a few deals, so we got 3 types of people renting: normal people, business people, and homeless/jobless people who try to live out of a storage unit and stay in the facility most of the day, rearranging their storage unit so they had an excuse to stay. Now, our story begins with the normal people, unfortunately. Most normal people are normal, as you would think. They are moving, need a place to store stuff. Most of the time, they aren't happy with moving, and that makes sense. I try to be patient and kind. One facility rule that owners had me enforce was that we need to kick everyone out of the facility at 8 sharp. No exceptions. The office closes before then, and my job was to drive back at 8 every night and check the whole facility. By the way, I'm not on the clock for time. I'm supposed to just do a security check. Enter a family with an older lady and her daughter renting a unit. They were easy to work with. I respect elders a lot, so I usually try to be extra friendly to older people. Move-in day. They had a big old truck full of stuff. It looked like a lot of the stuff was going to be stacked in the unit. Of course, when I come back later that night, they're still there unloading stuff. They had a bunch of guys helping them. I drive up and remind them of the rules. They must be out by 8.
But we are almost done. We can get more in. Just need a few minutes.
With previous experience, I knew how this was gonna go. I repeated the rules and told them they also signed a contract that they'd obey these rules, but I said I'd check the rest of the facility first so they could wrap up. They said thank you. I finish and drive to the front, and of course, they aren't there. I get out of my car and walk over to them, and they're still going strong unloading. So I decide to pressure a little and walk over and let them know once again the facility is closed. I stand next to them for 30 minutes. They finally decide they aren't going to finish tonight and pack up. 50 minutes after the facility closed, I let them out of the gate and went home at 9. Now, my boss caught wind of this. My boss was a real stickler for rules and stuff. He kinda had a notion that people would follow contract rules if they were enforced, but I knew people would just push our limits. My boss told me that we needed to keep the gate locked after closing time and we can't have people staying late. I didn't want to stay that late either. The next day they came back, late. They got there as the office was closing in the evening to continue unloading. I really hoped they got the message the first time, but lo and behold, when I came for the security check, they were there unloading what seemed to be a new load. I wasn't as patient with them this time. I wasn't rude, but I was definitely being more blunt with how I talked to them. I let them know again that they needed to leave immediately.
Okay, we are just finishing up.
I had heard that one before. This time I circled the unit block they were at, and every time I passed, I let them know I was done with the rest of the facility. They seemed to get the picture, but the clock still was ticking, and by the time they closed the unit and I tailgated their truck out of there, it had already been another 40 minutes past. I was tired of getting lectured by my boss on how we needed to enforce these rules. For some reason, he had a mindset that I was letting them stay and being nice. No, the first time I was nice, but I wasn't letting them stay, and I can't physically force these people out. The third day, they were finishing the unloading. While on site, I saw them and went up to them and just gave them a pass-by reminder that they needed to wrap up before 8. Later that night, I check, and yep, they are still there. I'm getting a bit peeved at this point, so I check the facility quickly, then I decide to drive out. The front gate has a code lock that denies codes after 8:10. Yeah, there was even a grace period. Since they had me let them out every time, they didn't know their code wouldn't work. At least since they didn't seem to know the rules, they definitely didn't read that in bold highlighted in our contract. So, as per my boss's order, I left the gate locked and left. I lived close, so I went home. Got a snack, watched a couple shows, then about 9:40 went back to the facility to find them stuck at the gate. They were not happy, but as I let them out, I said to them, "The facility closes at 8 sharp and this gate locks. We aren't always around to let you out. That's why we post the close times everywhere. A lie since I checked it every day, but I didn't want them to think they could get away with it anymore. They just angrily left, but I didn't have a problem with them again. I do feel bad for that older lady, but I don't know. They just weren't listening. People who refuse to leave when you're trying to close are the worst.
Oh, they did nothing wrong. He should have just been a little more considerate and gave them a little bit more time.
Coffee lady. So I work at McDonald's right now, and man, we get really uptight entitled people. This particular lady, deemed coffee lady by my coworkers and managers, is the epitome of entitled. She comes in, without fail, every single day, sometimes twice or 3 times a day, but always orders coffee. Now, this wouldn't be an issue if she wasn't so picky about it and so nasty and rude to new people who don't know her order by now. When I first started working there, because she didn't recognize me, after watching me make her coffee just the way she likes it, she had me redo it 5 times because it didn't taste right, and she got all snotty with me. She's nice only to the people who make it right, which is total BS. For those wondering, her coffee order has to be from a fresh pot. She doesn't mind waiting for one to brew, but even if you claim it's from a fresh pot that just finished, she won't believe you and will demand you brew another pot. She used to get a large fresh coffee with 3 creams, 24 sugars, 24. Thank God she only gets a medium fresh with 2 creams, 20 sugars now, but dang. Recently, we've started to mess with her because she's been coming into our restaurant, talking to other customers, saying how nasty our restaurant is, how we're putting customers at risk of getting sick by putting the cream and sugar in the coffee and not putting a lid on the cup while we wait for the coffee to brew. Madness, right? She's a nasty gossip, but oh so gullible. We hired this new girl about a month or 2 ago, but she hasn't been on front counter much, so she's never had to make this woman's coffee before. Cue today where the lady comes in and the new girl makes the coffee, fresh pot and everything. We have a machine that gives exact sugars and creams, so there's no way she could mess it up. And the lady says it clearly isn't fresh and tastes wrong. She makes a new pot of coffee, makes the coffee again, somehow still wrong. This lady starts being a nasty jerk to the poor girl and tries to tell her how to do her job. I would have intervened, but I was busy taking orders on headset for drive-thru and couldn't leave my station. Finally, one of my coworkers steps in, love her, and she tells this lady she will remake her coffee. Now, mind you, this lady recognizes my coworker because my coworker has been working there for years. Little does this lady know, my coworker is a savage, and I love her for it. She goes back to the first pot of coffee, the one used for the first cup of coffee that the new girl used, and uses that to make the lady's coffee. And when she gave it to her, the coffee lady tasted it and said it tasted perfect, and started telling the new girl, "This is how you make coffee," and praising my coworker for actually knowing how to do her job. Meanwhile, she doesn't even realize she's playing herself because it tastes the same as the first cup she was given. I hate entitled customers, and even though it's not getting in their faces and calling them out on their BS, it's the small things in life that bring us joy. Do any of you drink coffee? If so, how do you take it? Please let me know in the comments.
Oh, I love my morning coffee. It really gets me ready to talk to some managers.
Well, for now, how about you give us our important special announcement?
Of course. Huge shout out to Crystal, our newest channel member. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Join as a channel member today, or support us on Patreon, and we'll give you a special shout out in our next video. And if you'd like me to make a special video for you to prank your friends with, come visit us on Fiverr. Links pinned in the comments below.
And shout outs to our regenerals of the day, Chissy Spider, Marissa, and Kitty Cat.